If we're truly seeing it in a sacramental way, this is making very bold statements about God, God's character, God's nature, God's desires for us, God's activity. So, I think that's where the debate really comes, not fully comes down to, but in some ways it comes down to, do we treat baptism more like an ordinance, which is Jesus said, do this, so we do it, and then we kind of apply meaning to what that is, or as a sacrament to say, God is doing something here, and in a sacramental way, God is inviting us to participate in his very life and nature.
Right? What is baptism? What are the benefits of baptism? And who should be baptized? How should they be baptized? Those are a few of the questions we're taking up today in this episode of Theology Project. My guest is Dr. Jonathan Powers, and we'll be looking at John Wesley's treatise on baptism. Jonathan is the editor of a recent book called New Life in the Risen Christ, a Wesleyan Theology of Baptism. It's full of essays from leading voices in the pan-Wesleyan movement who can shepherd us as we reflect on the beauty of the sacrament of baptism. There's a link to the book in the description below, and I highly recommend that you grab a copy and read it carefully. Jonathan Powers is a friend, and I'm excited for you to get to hear from him today. He serves on the faculty of Asbury Theological Seminary and holds a Doctor of Worship Studies from the Robert E. Webber Institute for Worship Studies and a PhD from the London School of Theology, where he worked on the theology of Robert Webber. If you aren't familiar with John Wesley's treatise on baptism, there's a link in the description below. Be sure to check that out. And I recently recorded an episode of Theology Project with Ryan Danker on the Lord's Supper. It's something of a companion to this conversation. It's also linked below if you've not seen or listened to it already. Now let's get to our conversation on the Wesleyan understanding of baptism. We're talking about baptism today. We're talking about John Wesley's treatise on baptism and a Wesleyan theology of baptism. And this conversation comes in the middle of an ongoing Protestant debate on baptism. Mode of baptism, immersion, sprinkling, pouring, subjects of baptism, infants, professing adults. Why does it matter to get this right?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the basic answer for me is because what it says about God. Baptism is not just what it says about us. Depending on how we're thinking about it, if we're truly seeing it in a sacramental way, this is making very bold statements about God, God's character, God's nature, God's desires for us, God's activity. So, I think that's where the debate really comes, not fully comes down to, but in some ways it comes down to, do we treat baptism more like an ordinance, which is Jesus said, do this, so we do it, and then we kind of apply meaning to what that is, or as a sacrament to say, God is doing something here, and in a sacramental way, God is inviting us to participate in his very life and nature, right? And so to get it right, is to say, like, what claims is it making about God, who God is, what God does, how we relate to God, how God seeks to work in us through his grace. And so I think it makes a whole lot of statements about God and God's grace and even Christ, and the triune God, not just the Father or one part of the Godhead. But so it's crucial for that.
I wonder if it would be helpful for us to just kind of set forth the major positions, right?
Sure.
So you mentioned an ordinance and sacrament. So ordinance belongs to one side, typically called Credo Baptist or Believers Baptist.
Mm-hmm.
The other side would be sacramental view, which often involves the baptism of infants or small children.
Right.
What's the difference theologically?
Yeah, theologically, what I usually find, like, where the emphasis is, so in an ordinance, the emphasis tends to be on our actions, our activity, my decision, my faith, my um, taking the step, my willingness to take the step and willing to make a public proclamation of what God has done for me, in me, so it's not like God's absent. It's just that the primary subject is me.
Hmm.
Um, in a sacramental sense, the primary subject is God, So, God is doing this first, and inviting me into this. And so in a sacramental way, God is extending grace, God is drawing us in and offering us are partaking in his own very life, right? And so God is the primary actor here before we can ever act, before we ever do anything.
Yeah.
God is acting, God is doing this. So, and even those for an ordinance or a kind of a credo baptism would say, well, God has done this for me first. But we're saying like, no, but this act, like you're seeing this act as a response to what God has done. And not that that's completely wrong or absent, but in the other, for the other. But to say we actually want to see this act itself as part of the symbol and the action of God's work in our life before any of these other steps are taken. If that
Yeah.
makes sense, like kind of yeah,
So it may be helpful to say because, yeah, and I appreciate the nuance you gave there because, like, I've got good friends who are Baptist theologians, and they would say we're not saying God is doing nothing,
right,
right?
right,
They would insist that there is
yeah,
that aspect there, but the emphasis is on in the
yeah,
act of baptism itself a certain movement of direction of action,
yeah,
where
yeah,
when in a sacramental view, whether it's a child or an adult, and I often say this when I'm baptizing an infant, that this means the same thing, whether we're talking a 10-month-old or a 100-month-old,
yeah,
or I'm sorry, a 10-month-old or a 100-year-old, right? Like
yeah,
this is the meaning of baptism doesn't change when you're with your age, right?
right,
But the primary movement, there's something objective and something subjective.
yeah,
Objectively is God's work, and the
yeah,
emphasis is on that, God
mm,
working through the church. The subjective would have to do with the parents and the church um, offering like a testimony of faith or being brought on the faith of others, which is a theme in
yeah,
Scripture. Um, and then on the other side, yes, God is giving entrance into the covenant, but it seems quite conditioned on the subjective profession of faith.
yeah.
Is that a fair
Yeah,
way?
so I mean, one way to maybe think about it is in a sacramental view, we might compare it to adoption.
Hmm.
You know, that this is happening, and um, if a parent is adopting a newborn baby, for instance, they're doing all of this, and there's still there's a lot happening there still that the life after like, there's a lot more to it than just that moment, right? Like it's not just stuck in that moment. Where I mean, I don't know what I'd use on the other side of that, but on the sacramental side, at least, to say the emphasis would be similar to adoption
Yeah.
in that way, rather than something that like this adoption is contingent upon me choosing to be adopted or
Right.
or kind of agreeing to it,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So on sacramental, the emphasis is on God's action through the
yeah,
church
yes, through the church, so key. Yeah,
to take hold of and bring a person into the covenant. We'll talk more about
yeah,
that in just a second.
sure.
And on the kind of believers Baptist or credo Baptist. Credo is just the Latin word for faith.
Mhm.
Believers Baptist. Pedo, Greek word for child,
Yep.
child baptizer, right?
Yeah.
Get our language stuff out of the way.
Right.
Um, but it's the focus is on the
Yeah.
subjective.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so there is debate on that, and
Yes.
both sides make extensive, robust arguments, and we can acknowledge that this isn't something over which we like kind of like we can accept folks who disagree with us on baptism as brothers and sisters in Christ.
Completely. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of one of those third tier, or I guess maybe second level. It'd be hard to be on the same staff, right?
Sure.
Though there
Yeah.
are some denominations which sort of leave that open.
Yeah.
Um, talk more about the wisdom of that in a little bit.
Yeah.
but but it's not one of those like you're not a Christian if you don't agree with me on this,
Yeah.
right? So we
Yeah.
need some charitable conversation, which is kind
Yes.
of what we're trying to do today, right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
Good. So Wesley writes this treatise on baptism,
Hmm.
and it sure sounds like he's responding because he includes a section of responding responses to objections. Tell us a little bit about like what's the background discussion in his mind.
Yeah, so a lot in England in his day with the church. I don't know like if there's a particular person he's responding to at any point. And maybe he was, and we don't know in general. But there are conversations about this. You've got a number of movements that are happening across Europe and in the church, other traditions coming out. So you've got you know, Puritans in England that are trying to reject a lot of the more Catholic ideas and forms of the church, and purify the church of those kind of Roman Catholic practices. And so they're pushing against some different things. You have a Quaker movement that's arising up that doesn't accept a sacramental um, um, kind of theology, the traditional sacramental theology of the church, saying, we don't see these outward forms as significant, and especially signifying any way God's grace. It's more about the inward movement of the heart. So the pietists kind of there too. So you've got a lot of that, and so there's all this conversation happening very broadly in the church. And, if you have a new movement like Methodism coming out of Anglicanism, it can be like, well, we've had this historically and traditionally, and maybe we're not really even seeing that in practice much anymore. Or if we do, it's like, yeah, they're just baptizing babies, but we don't see it making any difference in anybody's life. Like we say God's involved in this. Why are they all living as heathens then?
Yeah.
I mean, Wesley had that concern himself. He's like, what's going on here?
Right.
Um, so so you can understand people like really questioning things and they're confused about like what do we do? Um, so he's really, he takes this treatise that his father, I believe, wrote, and says, I want to rewrite that, kind of remix it, as I said in a conversation earlier. He's taking that and saying, like, I need to help, especially Methodists, but the people in the church say, understand what is baptism? Why is this important? What's going on here? And how do we respond to some of these questions or objections that might arise from different factions in the broader church? Now, not just Anglican church, though there too,
Yeah.
but in the broader church and broader culture today. And so, really trying to equip pastors to be knowledgeable and to understand theologically what's happening here, and then to know how to respond to some of those objections themselves. And so the treatise on baptism ends up being his longest, like kind of single work that he did, like this, like treatise, sermon, anything like that. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not a sermon, but the writing, like this kind of writing, it's
Yeah.
the longest thing he ever published. So it's he apparently saw it as very important.
Yeah. Real quick, let me encourage everybody to check out this book, Jonathan Powers edited, New Life in the Risen Christ, a Wesleyan theology of baptism. Chapters in here from leading voices in the pan-Wesleyan movement. Wesley's treatise on baptism is in the appendix. So that's what earlier this week I went and reread it
Oh,
in
cool,
in this and marked it up real good.
cool.
But I was really excited to see this book published and commend it as a great resource to folks in the Global Methodist Church and the broader Pan Wesleyan movement as well. Just a tremendous resource. And we'll drop a link below show notes or in the YouTube description to an online version of Wesley's treatise on baptism. I'll track something down and put
Awesome.
that out there. And we'll put a link to this book
Cool.
because I highly recommend pastors, church members, anybody who is even remotely interested in what is a Wesleyan view of baptism, check it out. I have found it tremendously helpful as I'm working through the essays. So
Thank
thanks
you.
for editing this book.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. I mean, I think, in light of this conversation, it's important that we get this right
Yeah,
and understand, and not understand Wesley to say like we need to get this right because of Wesley, but say, no, we think that, believe that Wesley was trying to point us towards the historic faith and
that's right.
to really understand the character of God. And he's a great guide for us in that. And so, for all of us in the Wesleyan camp, let's think about this seriously and Look at that. So thank you. And really wanted to put the treatise in the book for that. I was like, we can't have a Western theology of baptism and not include the treatise in it, you know.
Yeah, I'm
So
glad you did. It was when I was kind of looking at the table of contents, I was like, that's great. And the new birth, I think, is in there as well.
mm, yeah,
So Wesley looks at the landscape. He recognizes that the early Methodist movement needs some theological shepherding, if I can
yeah,
put it that way,
yeah, that's perfect.
on the doctrine of baptism. And so he produces this treatise, 5 sections, if I counted correctly. What is baptism? What are the benefits of baptism? Is this an ongoing practice beyond the apostolic age? And who are the proper subjects of baptism? So that's the adult infant version. And then response to objections, right?
Yep.
Especially response to objections about infant baptism. So let's just kind of take those in turn.
All right.
Number one, what is baptism? How does Wesley answer that question? He gets into the Greek terms, like just basically like let's define the term baptizo, Greek for
Yeah.
baptism. Walk us through that.
Yeah. So I mean, one of the things that is so key for Wesley is in terms of baptism, his definition is the very first statement. Well, I mean, he has his kind of little preface there to it, but the very first statement, that first section, you know, what it is the initiatory sacrament which enters us into covenant with God. It was instituted by Christ, who alone has the power to institute a sacrament, you know, a seal, a plate, like all these things, and say it is an initiatory sacrament. And I find that initiatory statement to be so critical
Hmm.
in this. You know, it's not a conclusion sacrament. It's not
Yeah.
a well, I mean, all encompassing. That's not a right way to put it, but a concluding, kind of a consummating sacrament in that kind of way. You know, um, but it's initial. Like there is something that this is moving us toward, right? It's actually beginning something. It's not finalizing something. It's beginning something. I love that. You know, like that. Really caught me with Wesley the first time I read it. I was like, what does that mean? Like that, even just the whole book, I was like, wow, I just love to explore what does that mean, you know,
Initiate.
then.
Yeah.
So that's his very first statement off the bat, right? But yeah, he gets into some of the language and everything, saying, you know, like when we look at the Greek there, you know, a sense of there's a drowning that happens, you know, like it's water, right? He says
Yeah.
the proper subject is water. Like we use
Right.
water in baptism. That's the element that is used, you know. Um, and what that symbolizes. And to move to another of his writings really quickly, um, you know, his explanatory notes on the New Testament with Romans 6 are so crucial here because where Paul is making that connection to do you not know in baptism you were buried with Christ and you're rising to new
Yeah.
life with Christ, which is where the title came from, New Life in the Risen Christ, you know, rising to new life with Christ. So that with the language there itself even is showing towards that, right? There
Yeah.
is a death and a rising that is happening. There's a drowning that happens in baptism,
Yeah.
a washing that happens in baptism, and something on the other side of it.
I was really two things real quick that just sort of I appreciated and I think that are relevant to the contemporary conversation particularly. The whole treatise is relevant, but these I thought
Hmm.
were really interesting. You frequently hear people say in debates today that baptizo means immerse,
Oh, right. Yeah.
right? And let me just say this, it manifestly does not, right? And there are a multitude of texts, both canonical and outside of the canon of scripture, that demonstrate baptizo does not mean immerse,
Yeah.
right? And Wesley makes the case from Greek biblical texts here, right? So you've got
Yeah.
in Mark 7 the language of washing the like the you got people who wash their hands as a part of a religious
Yep.
ritual before they eat, right? The word there is baptizo. It's the baptism, one of the cognates, and again you've got other biblical texts outside where like their baptism is here. Baptism, this is just a thing for me, so I'm going to say it. Baptism, the Greek word baptizo means to wash. The use it's the use of water in a religious washing ritual, and
Yeah.
it could happen through a variety of modes. There are Greek or there are Jewish texts that talk about sofas being baptized. Right, pretty sure they didn't plunge that
Right.
under the
Yeah.
water, right?
Yeah.
It's that's not what's going on here. This is
Yeah.
baptism could be dipping. We've got pools in all, architects have found these Jewish ritual dipping pools where people appear to have gotten in and gone under the water. Yes,
Mm.
but the term itself, the semantic range includes different kinds of modes of washing of people and things, right?
Yeah.
So it's let's just be clear about the data in relation to the semantic range and how this word is used. And
Yeah.
what really entertains me on this, when I laughed out loud when I read this, is when he said sprinkling is really a better image of burial because nobody gets plunged through the dirt.
Right. Right.
Like
Yeah.
instead, we dig a hole. Nobody like just gets shoved through the dirt, right?
Yeah.
We sprinkle dirt on top of a coffin in a hole.
Yeah.
That's what, so sprinkling water is more like sprinkling dirt because nobody just
Yeah.
gets smashed into the
Smashed it.
turf.
Yeah. So true. So much of his snark comes out here, that like beautiful
He's
Wesleyan
funny.
snark that's like subtle but
Yeah.
awesome. So like that, or when he's talking about Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch, he says they went down into the water, but that was like they were at the chariot. They had to go down to the
Yeah.
water. We don't know how deep it was. It could have been to their waist. It could have been to their
Yeah.
knees. Maybe it was only at their ankles.
Yeah. I want to say, I can't remember if I read that maybe too, in maybe the notes in Mark on Jesus's baptism. Like
Oh yeah.
I think he has made that point in multiple places, but don't quote me on that. That he's saying like, when it talks about, he says the folks who argue that it must have been immersion because they went down into the water, he basically is saying you're reading your assumptions into the text
Right. Yeah.
because it doesn't say that. It
Yeah.
doesn't say that he went down under the water. It
Right.
could very well mean they climbed down the bank of the Jordan River into the
Yeah.
water
Right.
and
Because it was so
did a
low.
ritual
Yeah.
washing
Yeah.
there standing
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And he says, he's like, and in Acts, he's like, you got thousands of people being baptized. Do you really think there's enough water for all of them to go
Yep.
under?
Yep.
So
Exactly.
he really is a bit aggressive on some of these things.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting. Yeah. And I was thinking that one too, where he says that in Acts is that, the disciples are baptizing thousands of people. Like, do you think that there was that much water or that they could have like taken time just to do it this way all the time? It's like, no, it was probably,
Like some sort of like, let's just sling some water on some
right.
people or something,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I think
Yeah.
I find if to listeners, if you haven't read the treatise, it's humorous and he gets a little
Mm,
snarky. He kind of has some fun. He gets a little aggressive. So
yeah.
it's really an interesting, helpful way to come at it. So,
It is. It is.
and you mentioned the initiatory sacrament. This is probably a good place to mention, right? So when we talk about the two sacraments, baptism and the Lord's Supper, Eucharist, Holy
Yep.
Communion, use those terms interchangeably.
Yep.
Um, that this is one of the ways they complement one another, right?
Right. Totally. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that relationship.
Yeah, there's a chapter in the book by Matt Sigler that's really beautiful, where he talks about he calls it preserving the sacramental sequence, meaning um, meaning the historic um, sequence, the historic kind of practice has been the baptized come to the table, and so he really emphasizes how the Eucharist then serves as a remembrance of baptism every time we come. We're remembering what God has done to bring us into his life. And so that connection there, that they're really two sides of the same coin. In baptism, we're initiated into covenant with God, and God is drawing us into his life. As Wesley says in that Romans 6 explanatory notes, says when we go into that water, we're engrafted into Christ, into his body, the church.
Yeah.
Right? There's an engrafting that happens. And I love that term engrafting that he uses that. I mean, that's prior to all of our current medical use of it, but I love it. And engrafting into Christ and to the church and then we're drawn in, being drawn into Christ's life and to go on as disciples of Christ and to be sustained and nourished at the table, that grace that is being given. And so that's being renewed every time we come to the table, the same grace that we're being invited into in baptism, and the life of God. And that's that sacramental piece again, where God is drawing us into his very life. And through these actions, we are partakers in God, and that God is working his grace and his life within us, to transform us.
Mm.
And so this constant walk in that. And so baptism has been the one time thing, to say this initiates us into that. And this is that key critical moment that is kickstarting the rest of our life as a disciple of Christ, and as part of the family of God and all this. And now we gather at the table for this. In some ways, say like a family meal,
Yeah.
but also for that grace to renew, like saying like what was done here, God continues to do in me. I continue to walk in that and to receive that and be drawn into it every time that I come here. So that's been part of that
Yeah.
understanding between the two.
Would you want to say, so in baptism, Christ unites us with himself, and in
Mhm.
communion, he maintains that union. He
Yeah, it
sustains
sustains
that
us, and yeah,
union. He sustains the union. Because
yeah, it
again,
sustains. Yeah.
but like when we talk about a sacramental view of Christ, of the Lord's Supper, right?
Yeah.
That the emphasis is on Christ taking us to himself, offering
Yeah.
himself to us,
Yeah.
participation in Christ is 1 Corinthians 10 language
Yep.
there.
Yep.
And so, but it's the maintenance or the sustaining of
Yeah.
something that has been initiated,
Yeah.
and it's initiated through baptism,
Yes.
which
Yeah.
is
That's
which. Go ahead. Sorry.
no, no. I was gonna say yeah, which has been the historic
Yeah.
stance of the church,
Right.
historic
Right.
understanding. Yeah.
So this isn't novel. We're not making like this has been a
No.
long like ancient. This is ancient Christian
Yeah.
belief and practice.
Yeah.
It's also why you don't get why we don't rebaptize,
Right.
right? Because you're initiated once,
Right.
right?
Yeah. I mean, I say, when I'm talking to my students about this, I will say that, if we think of it as adoption or marriage, it's I mean, think about the prodigal son, right? The prodigal left, but the father never walked away from his commitment, from his, um, so the father's still there to take him in. So, or like marriage, if you're married, it's important to renew our vow. Like I think remembrance of baptism, renewal of baptism vows, that's wonderful, beautiful. We need to do that because I think people want to have that sense my baptism means something, you know.
Yeah,
And the problem is that we just leave it in the past. It's like, well, that happened then, and that meant something then, but we're not the dynamism of it's not carrying out with us, as we go. And so those renewal and remembers, but those aren't like being, it's not you're being baptized again, kind of like a renewal of marriage vows. I mean, you're getting remarried.
yeah,
You're just renewing what happened here. God never signed divorce papers from you. I mean, now we get salvation and
yeah,
stuff. Like we're not talking about, but
yeah.
in the
You're
sense of
making
that,
a memorial to
yeah,
honor a thing that's happened before, aren't you?
yes,
This is something that comes up in pastoral ministry with some
yeah,
regularity, I think.
yeah,
And I've had instances where people in the church have come and said, I was baptized at some point before in my life, whether it's an infant or in high school, and I really wasn't really walking with Jesus, and now, or maybe I was like straight up like living a life that dishonored him one way,
yeah,
one in one way or another. Now I am, excuse me, like I've committed my life to him. I feel renewed. I trust the Lord. I want to be a committed disciple. Do I need to be rebaptized? Or even I want to be rebaptized. And
right,
clergy will sometimes feel like, I don't want to discourage this awesome thing that's happening in this person's
right.
life. And so we may sort of kind of compromise a little bit on the rebaptism thing.
Mhm.
And I would just encourage clergy, pastors, like if that happens, there's some really wise, I think, and theologically responsible shepherding strategies. One of which I typically just invite people like, hey, have a seat. Let's talk about baptism a little bit. Let's talk about what
Yeah,
happened when you were a child,
yeah,
or when you were a teenager. Let's talk about how God took hold of you, how he brought you into his covenant. Let's
mhm,
talk about how he united you with Jesus. And even if you weren't walking with Jesus in that whole time, that doesn't mean God failed in that.
mhm.
It doesn't mean it
Right,
was
exactly.
ineffective.
Right.
And I would even want to say the reason you're here now is because the grace extended in your
Yes,
baptism is doing what it does,
exactly.
right?
Yeah. If I can play off that for a minute,
Yeah.
so to use two like kind of big theological terms here, when we're talking about sacramental theology, two words that we use a lot, and this isn't just sacramental theology, but it's key to sacramental theology. One word is anamnesis.
Hmm.
So anamnesis and
Tell
anamnesis,
us what
kind of
that
like
means.
yeah, yeah. Anamnesis. So if you think like amnesia,
Yeah.
amnesia is a eradication of the past, right? It's not just forgetting. I'll ask my students sometimes, what is amnesia? They're like, forgetting. I'm like, well, no, I didn't like amnesia my keys at home.
Yeah.
I amnesia is it's gone. It's no longer there.
Hmm.
Anamnesis is in a way like the opposite of that. It's like the past is a current reality. The past is made real again right now. That's what anamnesis is.
Yeah.
So when Jesus says, do this in remembrance of me, do this in anamnesis of me, like this is real for you right now, right?
Yeah.
So that past act is being made real now. That's that kind of memory. It's not a cognitive memory.
Yeah.
So I'll have uh, people talk to me sometimes to say, we talk about remember our baptism. How can I remember it if I was baptized as an infant? I can't remember it. It's
That's
like,
not what.
that's not what memory means.
Yeah.
And if all of the emphasis on baptism has to be like our cognitive understanding and our cognitive ability to accept it or to do whatever, then, we're putting a whole lot on our brains
That's
here
right.
and on ourselves, but also there's certain segments of humanity that will never be able to be baptized because they might have disabilities, right?
Yeah.
David Watson writes a chapter in the book on cognitive or just developmental disabilities and baptism and how do we think
Yeah.
about this. So when we talk about remembrance, we're saying that thing in the past, you're claiming it and saying this is real in my life right
Right.
now. And so that's the thing with baptism, and I've kind of hinted at this a little bit, but say baptism is not a past act. It's not I was baptized, it's that I am baptized,
That's right.
you know? And so baptism carries with us throughout our life. And baptism is pointing to, and so this is the other side of it, anamnesis, throughout our lives, we are growing into what baptism signified,
Hmm.
union with Christ,
Yeah.
right? Constantly growing that. The other side of it is prolepsis or proleptic idea, and that's the future becoming a current reality. So the future part of that is to say, two sides of this as we think of with baptism. One side of it is baptism isn't about the amazing Christian that I am right now, alone. It's about the Christian I'm supposed to become,
Yeah.
that I'm growing into, that
Yep.
union with Christ throughout the rest of my life, the holiness that we are called to and drawn to,
Yeah.
it's pointing towards that whenever we're baptized. We're never good enough to be baptized, right? But there's going to be this trajectory of our life to grow in holiness.
Mm.
And baptism is kickstarting that and saying that growth in holiness that's going to happen is being made real now too.
Yeah.
You know,
I'm inclined to say, I don't know if this is the right term or not. You can tell me if it's the wrong thing, but the sacraments are transtemporal in some way,
I
right?
love that. Yeah,
So maybe we can make that a thing, right?
I
Sacramental
love it.
transtemporality. That sounds like a good.
Transtemporality.
There you go. And in this moment in baptism, I am um, being joined to Christ in like the thing he did in the past is being brought into my present. His
Yeah,
death and resurrection, the new life that he won and that he now has as he reigns at the right hand of God the Father Almighty, now in a resurrected body, glorified
yeah,
body with glorified scars. Like
right.
he joins me, he unites me with that reality from the past in the present, and it anticipates the forthcoming resurrection of the body in the
Exactly.
future, right?
Yeah,
So that there's new life.
yeah,
And then communion, the Lord's Supper, unites me with continually with his past sacrifice, his past.
yeah,
Ryan, in I had a conversation a couple weeks ago with Ryan Danker on sacramental theology, the Eucharist, and he kept talking about representing. You take that previous sacrifice and present it now, right?
yeah,
It comes into the future.
yeah,
It transcends time in that way, I
yeah.
think. And
And the presentation of Christ
it
in heaven,
anticipates.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was saying, and the presentation of Christ in heaven as the
As he
sacrifice.
presents his own blood before
Yeah,
the altar. Yeah, that's right.
yeah, yeah.
And it anticipates the wedding feast of the Lamb,
Amen. Yeah,
the liturgy
yeah.
until we feast together in your
Till we
heavenly
feast again.
kingdom,
Yep,
right?
yep, yep,
And so there's this like it's not just well that happened in the past. I'm trying to remember it, and I'm hoping for
yep,
something in the future.
yeah.
It's the past, the present, and the future sort of overlap, interlocked, and
Yeah.
collide
Yeah.
in the sacraments.
Yeah. That,
Transtemporality. That's my
yeah.
word.
That's exactly, I love that transtemporality. That's where I see time just collapses in on itself, right?
Yeah.
And, um,
Time is coherent in Jesus, right?
yeah,
In him all things hold together.
yeah, yeah. So going back to your first question,
Yeah.
why does it matter to get these things right? Because of what it says about God.
Mhm.
God is eternal. Therefore,
Yeah.
God is the only one that can bring eternity
Yeah.
into a moment,
Oh, it's
right?
so beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing, and we get to participate in that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's mind blowing, but beautiful. I mean, you're right. It's just so beautiful.
Yeah.
And
So
so,
in baptism, God, the triune God, through the person and work of Christ, applied by the Holy Spirit, takes us to himself. And
yeah,
in communion, he fills us with himself. He
yeah,
continually fills us with himself.
continually fills us with Himself. Yeah, it's nourished us on the way. And the other part with this timepiece then that I love is the sense of our baptism means nothing outside of Jesus's own baptism.
Mm. Say a little bit
Um,
more about that.
yeah, yeah, and there's that question, and this is the question I like to raise with churches, with pastors, with students. Say, why did Jesus have to be baptized?
Mm.
Because if it is for the same reasons that we give for baptism, sometimes it doesn't make any sense,
Mm.
right?
Yeah. No,
Um,
I've made that very point because a lot of times in Credo Baptist spaces, Believers Baptist, it's sort of we're being baptized because we're following his example, is the argument. And I want
yeah,
to say that's not an argument because like Jesus didn't need to be united to himself. He didn't need original sin to be washed away. He
right,
didn't need the forgiveness of his sins. Like he doesn't need sacramental union with
right,
himself or God. Like
right.
that's not it makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
So what's the relationship between our baptism and Jesus's?
Yeah, so for me, it really comes together in Matthew 3
Okay.
when John the Baptist, it's such a weird interaction, right? Like Jesus comes to John and says, "You must baptize me." John's like, "No, you must baptize me." Then Jesus says, "No, we have to do this to fulfill all righteousness." Then John's like, "You're right, let's baptize you." And I'm like, "What?" Like I was a little too quick.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that a little bit more? So there's a sense of like what is righteousness? A lot of ways we can define that and can unpack that. But one way to understand that is that being perfectly right with God and with others, right? Like this right standing with God, right standing with others. Jesus is the only one who is perfectly right with God and others all at all times, right? The only human that was ever in that place. And so that aspect of righteousness we can understand. And so, what is Jesus doing in this moment was a sense of like Jesus is coming down to the water. This is another symbol of his incarnation, right? And even his like embodiment of, I mean, as people have said, like of Israel, what Israel was always meant to be, the
Mhm.
perfect Israelite, right? The one who had followed the law, like fully righteous. He is always following the law. He is always in right standing, right relationship, right um, stature with God and with others, all of that. So he goes into those waters, and by going into those waters, it's not the baptism of John, which is a baptism of repentance. It's now the baptism of Christ, where Jesus is going into those waters as the perfect one. He's identifying with us. It's a symbol of his incarnation. Like he
Yeah.
is identifying with us and going into those waters as the sinless one. He sanctifies the waters for all time. This is Tertullian
Yeah.
in his treatise on baptism, actually
Sanctifies the waters.
sanctifies the waters for all time. So that when we're baptized, we're not baptized into our own baptism. We're not
Mm.
baptized into our waters, this water. We are baptized into the very waters that Christ was baptized into.
Yeah.
That proleptic, that anamnesis. So the anamnesis is Christ's waters are being brought before us now.
Yeah.
The proleptic is Jesus's baptism was setting the trajectory, the stage for all baptisms.
Yeah.
So when we think about real presence in the
Mm.
sacraments, we think about that with the Eucharist all the time. What does it mean for Christ to be really present in baptism? Well, Christ, the way I put it with my students, it's like Christ is in those waters with his arms open, just ready to hug you and just bring you in. He's
That's
waiting for you
beautiful.
in
I
those
love
waters
that.
because it's his baptism. Like
Yeah.
you're baptized into his baptism.
Yeah.
And so we're all being brought into Christ's baptism in that way,
Mm.
and so that comes in. There's a difference there. And so again, that means something for our baptism. Like our baptism doesn't mean anything outside of his
Yeah.
because he is again that drawing us into himself and
Yep.
into his righteousness
The
and into
water,
his person.
the water is useless if he's not there.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. I think too, and this struck me when I was preaching through the Gospel of Mark one time, is like at the very beginning of the Gospel of Mark, you've got these quotes from the prophets that are about the return from exile,
Oh yeah.
right? And so you've got I think so what is Mark telling us about Jesus's baptism by putting it in the context of these return from exile texts,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
You go into the wilderness with John, You hear about the people of God returning from outside the Holy Land,
Yeah.
and they come through the water, like cross the Jordan into the Promised Land, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think we're invited to think this is I think complementary to everything you just said. I think,
Mm.
the sacraments are so multifaceted. You're going to get
True. Yep.
theological
Yep.
constructions and arguments and biblical theological constructions.
Yep.
But I think the Gospels are inviting us to see that Jesus in himself is enacting the return from exile
Yeah.
into the promised land.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a Israel eschatological restorationist
Yeah.
symbolic act.
Yeah.
And so then if he gives us union with himself in his baptism, which is the return from exile into the
Yep.
presence of God, then his baptism and all who have union with him in it is him carrying us into the presence of God.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
return. Adam goes into the wilderness,
Yeah.
and we're out there with Adam, and now we're brought back.
Yeah.
And that motif gets explored in different ways. In Matthew, Jesus is tempted in the wilderness, which is where Adam had to go, but he
Yeah.
succeeds. There's all these movements there, right? And that's
Yeah.
right after his baptism. So they're toying with that idea. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's more
Yeah.
helpful instead of we're just following Jesus' example. I just
Yeah.
don't find that compelling at all.
No. Yeah.
But these theological arguments of he sanctifies the water and is waiting there for us,
Yeah.
or he passes through the waters, bringing the people of God out of the wilderness into the presence of God in the Holy Land, and he
Yeah.
is the presence of God,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so like that is robust
Yeah.
theology.
Yeah. There's an undoing of Eden there, right?
Yeah.
In the
Exile,
sin. Yeah.
Eden, all of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Or restoration of Eden, maybe is the better way,
Yeah.
and then undoing of the sin
The
in the
return.
garden, but the restoration of Eden, like being brought back in. And
That's
so
right.
exactly you're saying, like that separation and now being carried back through Christ. And
Yeah.
so that, even when you think about the benefits of baptism, as Wesley talks about them in the treatise, where he says there's that washing away of original sin, the
That's
sin
right.
in Adam that we have inherited. Like we were there in the garden with him in a sense and have sinned. Like that is who we are now. But that is being washed away and not held against us, and we're being brought in back into the promised land, back into Eden in a sense.
Yeah.
In this, we are made part of the family of God again. We are with Christ. We are made co-inheritors of the kingdom. Yeah, and all the benefits thereof.
Yeah,
So
you get a real sense for the covenantal structure of Wesley's theology in this treatise.
yeah,
I think with Calvin, right? I mean,
yeah,
he
totally.
might want to say some things about baptism Calvin doesn't want to say,
Mhm.
particularly in terms of like regeneration. I don't know
Right.
Calvin on that, but I'd be
Yeah.
surprised. Um,
Yeah.
but for him, we are covenantally related to one of two covenant representatives, Adam or Jesus.
Yeah.
And everybody comes into the world covenantally related to Adam.
Mhm.
And in baptism, we're brought into a new covenant in Christ.
Yeah.
And so that corporate dynamic is really prominent for Wesley,
Yeah.
which I think represents, like when Paul talks about baptism and union with Christ in Romans 6, like he's coming right off. The problem is union with Adam in Romans 5,
Right. Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so Wesley's thought here is deeply, deeply oriented around the logic of Romans 5 and 6.
Yeah. And I love that. I mean, as you were saying, the corporate nature of it, that the church matters. The church, we are brought into the church, and that we are in this together. And um, part of it, and this is part of what I try to get into in my chapter, is that Jesus is still the rabbi, and we are all disciples. Like we never, because Jesus has led the way in baptism, right?
Mm-hmm.
He is the one we're unified with, but we are disciples of Christ now, and but Christ has given it to us to continuing the disciple process. We aren't to start our own schools, we aren't to start our own whatever, our own pathways, our own whatever, but we are to follow Christ, and this is that connection in Matthew 28 with the you know go make disciples. How you do that is by baptizing and teaching to obey all I've commanded.
Yeah.
Baptize in the name of the Trinity and teach to obey all I have commanded, right? And so we see disciples discipling one another. We enter into this communal discipleship together, as I call it, ecclesial discipleship. That's kind
Yeah.
of a term I've started using, but ecclesial discipleship. Christ is creating this ecclesial community that joins in community in ecclesial discipleship together. So it's that social holiness he talks about, where we grow in holiness together, right? And it's so key. And I think baptism is a reminder of that for us. It kickstarts that for us, and it's a reminder of that for us that we are all drawn in. It's a great equalizer
Yeah.
between us, right? We're all drawn in, and we're all called to be these disciples and to walk together. And Christ has given us the church to continue this life of holiness that He's called us to and is drawing us into together.
Yeah. That's so helpful. I want to bring, we kind of shifted to the benefits. So
Yeah,
I want to read this from Wesley
yeah,
from the sermon or the treatise. And so we've talked about, so baptism unites us with Jesus. It brings us into a new covenant,
hmm,
right? And I think all Protestants who baptize infants would affirm that baptism is covenant membership.
yeah,
The children are covenant members.
yeah.
Um, but Wesley, in this is point four in it, he puts it this way, and this is what, if a reader's listening to this and you haven't read the treatise before and you've been in a Methodist denomination and you haven't done a lot of baptism theology, this is going to jar you. I'm just trigger warning, right?
Right.
Let me put it that way. So this is what he says: by baptism, we who were, quote, by nature children of wrath, end quote, and he's quoting the scriptures,
Mm,
are made the children of God, right? Made the children of God. And this regeneration, which our church in so many places ascribes to baptism, is more than barely being admitted into the church, though commonly connected therewith. Being grafted into the body of Christ's church, we are made the children of God by adoption and grace. This is grounded on the plain words of our Lord: except a man be born again of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter into the kingdom of God. And so here's what Wesley says: by water, then, as a means, the water of baptism, we are regenerated or born again, whence it is also called by the apostle the washing of regeneration. It's quoting Peter there, if I recall.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and then the end of that paragraph is: herein a principle of grace is infused, which will not be wholly taken away unless we quench the Holy Spirit of God by long continued wickedness. So here's kind of the question, right?
yeah,
So in American evangelicalism generally, the concept of baptismal regeneration is generally rejected as Roman Catholicism
yeah,
kind of thing. Like if you bring that up in some context, you are going to get a radical, intense opposition.
yeah.
Interestingly, it has become sort of a bit of the conversation after the launch of the Global Methodist Church.
Hmm.
So, like Firebrand ran an article or so on
Yeah,
this. I've heard
that's
it on
right.
a few podcasts. And so all of a sudden, like we've come in for GMC folks, we've come into this new denomination and we're kind of sitting down going, what do we actually think about these things?
Yeah,
And somebody goes, well, here's what Wesley said about it. And we've got to kind of wrestle with that now.
yeah.
So just knowing like this idea of baptismal regeneration, like some people struggle with that as a concept.
Mhm.
Wesley seems to fully endorse the concept, unless I'm misreading him here. Um, Help us understand what's happening there, what's being said, what's not being said.
Yeah.
We might have needed a
Oh
whole
man.
episode on this. I don't know.
Yeah, it's so true. So in the book, I had Stephen Brunge write a chapter on baptism and regeneration. And I'll admit the idea for this book came from Billy Abraham. I was with him in Washington, D.C. one time. We were sitting in a car together, and he was like, "We really got to get some better material out there on from Wesley on baptism, like a Wesleyan theology of baptism." Jason Vickers had just released his book on a Wesleyan theology of the Eucharist.
Yeah,
And I thought like, well, let's do a companion to it.
that's
Like, well,
great.
so I'd talked to some people, and then they were like, "Oh, sure. Do you want to do it?" And I was like, "Oh, I just meant I wanted somebody to do it." So it's like, all
It's like
right,
in church, if you say something ought to be
yeah,
done, you're going to be in charge of it.
so true, so true. So then this happened, and but one of the things that Billy was really keen on is like we have got to like we really have to start wrestling with this and get on baptism and regeneration, like you know. So Stephen Brunge writes the chapter in the book on that, and I'd asked him to do it about 6 months later, like after I'd asked him to do it, like about when the chapter was due, or maybe a little before the chapter was due. I saw him someplace, and he said, "I just want to tell you that I hate you." I was like, "What?" He's like, "Why did you give me that chapter?"
Yeah.
He's like, "This is so complicated." He said it was good. He's like, "It was very good. It was very
Yeah.
helpful, and I hope I'm doing this well." But he said, he's like, "This is so
Yeah.
complex." So, I mean, it's interesting because, um, do we believe something actually happens in baptism? Does
Mm,
it actually mean something?
that's
Is
right.
God doing something in baptism or not?
Yep.
We just have to ask that question. Is God actually doing something in baptism or not? And if so, what? You
Hmm.
know, it's really what I think it boils down to. Um, and even Wesley is going to say like, yeah, they're always connected, you know, but he's going to say they might not always happen at the same time, but they're still
Hmm.
connected.
Yeah.
Um, but
Which
when
is
they don't
okay
happen the same time, do I
because signs and the things they signify are not always right next to each other.
exactly?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So they might not have happen at the same time, but they are connected,
Hmm.
unquestionably. So that's one thing to understand with Wesley. He would say in infants or maybe children, but we'll just say infants, kind of placeholder there. In infants, they are always connected. Like this is happening at the same time.
Hmm.
Something's happening. God is doing something in the goodness and grace of God, and that goes before us and all that, and in the activity of the church. And that's part of it too, is like this is meant to be within a covenantal community, right? Like
Hmm.
baptism is not you just kind of go off and do it on your own in some rogue thing. It's meant to be attached to the life of the church. And so in that, like this is happening. God is doing something, and this is happening in an infant. But he says in adults it's more complicated because they might happen at the same time or they might not, but they are still connected. So that's where it gets complicated.
There, though, you could even say the complication comes from things getting out of order, right?
Yes, right, right.
Because the normal practice would be, and like, so take, for example, circumcision in the Old Testament.
Yeah,
Abraham's experience was after his faith,
yeah,
right? But that's out of order
yeah,
because then
yeah,
God says, okay, so you've converted, you've trusted me, so now you have circumcision. Paul says, as a seal of the righteousness he had by
yeah,
faith.
yeah,
They're like, just let's be super, super clear. Abraham's circumcision was a sign, a symbol, a seal
yeah,
of his justification.
yeah,
All right.
yeah,
His believer circumcision is what he had.
yeah. Right.
Right. I didn't make that up. I stole it from
Right.
somebody. But
Circumcision.
that it was Abraham had a believer circumcision.
Right.
And then God said, now the normal practice of your people, of my covenant people, will be to give the seal of by faith justification to every 8-day old boy,
Yeah,
right? And and that's the normal way of things. Like
yeah,
that's how we do it. And
yeah,
so and at that point the child's a member of the covenant and the child is subject to the blessings and curses that come with that.
yeah. Right.
Um, the 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 exceptions come in. What do we do if somebody who isn't born into the covenant wants to become a God-fearer or part of the covenant people or
Yeah.
convert or become an Israel, a member of the Israelite covenant?
Mhm.
Well, they've got to kind of convert and show demonstrate I guess, the integrity of that, and then you go through the initiation process. But
Yeah.
that's not the normal way of things,
Right.
right? So in missionary settings, right, which acts as entirely a missionary setting,
Yeah.
right, you would expect things to not be in the normal order because
Right.
it's carving out new ground.
Right.
In evangelistic settings with adult professions of faith, you would expect things to be not in the normal order. Baptism
Yeah.
follows
Yeah.
the new birth, but in
Yeah.
the normal go of things, believer like covenant members have children. The promise is
Yeah.
for you and your children, and they're
Yeah.
brought into the covenant that way.
Yeah. So it's deeply ecclesiological in that. And I'd say this is the life of the church, the normal life and activity of the church. One way that I've explained this before is, you know, growing up, I always thought I had a boring testimony. That's what I always say. I have a boring
I say
testimony.
the same thing.
Yeah, you get it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, you know my dad. You've worked with my dad,
yeah,
Mike
yeah.
Powers.
Yep.
He preached at amazing churches. We had such good churches, such good people in Eastern Kentucky mainly, um and just invested in me, like they took care of me. My parents prayed with me at night, read me Bible stories. We had a revival service when I was like 9 and really wanted to make the my faith my own, and was in youth group, involved in all these things. I'm like, I didn't have any kind of crisis moment,
Yeah. Same
um,
here. No crisis.
yeah, and I just felt like I felt like there's nothing really special about me. But then like as I got like now, at some point in my life, I was like looking at it and I was like, my goodness, like this is a testimony to what the church is supposed to be.
Yep.
Like I'm a testimony to the church getting things right.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's beautiful. And say I was baptized as an infant, 6 weeks, so I don't know how old it was, but something like that, um, 6 weeks old, and then like my life just being in the church and being, all of this. It's like this is a testimony of the church getting. Now, I've not always gotten things
Yep.
right, but the church did a lot of really good, right things in me, like for me, and to surround me and bring me into this. I'm like, we need like it would actually be beautiful if we had more boring testimonies. I think that's what God wants.
Yeah. I think
Like,
we should write an essay on in praise of boring testimonies or something,
amen.
right? And
Yes.
this is the thing, it's exact same insight. I remember in college thinking, man, I got a really boring testimony, like, because I'm going to ordination and they want to know, what, tell us
Yeah.
about your conversion and call, right? That's the question.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I don't remember my conversion. I just had really faithful parents who raised me in the church and I love Jesus and want to be a pastor, right?
Yeah. Right.
And,
Yeah.
and then after I had kids, I started going, man, I really hope my kids have boring testimonies.
Yeah.
Like I don't want them to go and get addicted to drugs and go to prison or like whatever it is and have
Yeah.
like that. I don't want my children to have a Pauline conversion
Right. Right.
experience.
Right.
I just want them to grow up and love the Lord, you know?
Yeah.
And then it kind of dawned on me like that's what like don't we all want that? We
Yeah.
just want our kids to like I don't want my kids to remember being lost.
Yeah.
I I fully would say they come into the world sinners in
Yeah.
need of
Right.
salvation.
Right. Right.
But I would rather I would rather their earliest memories be Jesus loves me and I trust him.
Yeah. And if we feel that and want that, how much more does God?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Right, right. And
Yeah.
so we sort of and that's the thing, we sort of almost celebritize these like
Yeah.
wild conversions. And thanks be to God, like I
Amen.
got friends who were saved in prison and
Yeah.
I'm grateful for that. I celebrate that. I give thanks to it. I do not want that for my children.
Right.
Right? I
Right.
just want my kids to go to like they're going to Sunday school and I want to pray with them and for them and read the Bible with them and teach them how to articulate their faith and just let them grow up and love the Lord and be faithful people. And I
Yeah.
think that's the key. This I've heard it put a couple of people put it this way. And we've kind of shifted like I guess the regeneration question is both what happens and proper subjects, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
kind of both.
Yeah.
But and this relates to the discipleship piece too is I've heard it said, like in an infant baptism situation, we assume they're Christians until they show us they're not.
Mm,
And in a credo Baptist space, we assume they're not Christians until they
mm,
show us they are.
mm.
And that's one of the differences.
Yeah. That's a good
Um,
point. Yeah.
so sometimes you might hear somebody say, well, the child's baptized, but they're not a Christian yet, right?
Yeah.
And what they mean is have they had a conversion experience?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would want to say, well, actually, maybe the normal process is they are given union with Christ, entrance into the church, and an experience of God's grace
Yeah.
before they're able to even ask for it, which is a
Yeah.
lovely priority of grace image.
Yeah.
And then they don't need a future conversion experience because they
Yeah.
grow up in the means of grace.
Yeah, it is so true. I agree with all of that. And that's part of what I was saying, with the baptism kickstarting, the initiatory, but where I go in my chapter with baptism and discipleship to say it is kickstarting that lifelong process. And there could be these moments then, as we were saying, like a renewal of baptism or remembrance of it to say, there could be a moment when this becomes very real to you, and that's beautiful. And that's confirmation, right? Like we've had confirmation
Yeah,
as part of like really confirming this, not
that's
just
right.
like, well, we want to get some more members in the church, so let's do this class or whatever, but it's like, no, we really want you to say, like, I I understand my baptism. I am living into that
Yeah.
baptism. I understand I am baptized and it means something,
Yeah.
you know?
I wonder if so a couple questions on the regeneration piece, just to
Yep.
kind of maybe help us frame that up
Yep.
in ways that are not so just polarizing. Number
Sure.
one, Methodists love to talk about the means of grace, and we love to talk about baptism as a means of grace.
Hmm.
Is it possible for baptism to be a means of grace and not regenerating?
Hmm. I mean, in the sacramental sense, I'd say no.
Right.
You know?
Because if grace is the is like grace isn't a thing. Like I heard
Right.
people who've listened to this podcast have heard me say this a million times. Like
Good.
grace is not a substance that you kind of get in a bucket and at baptism
Yes.
it's like here you go, have some grace.
Yep.
No, grace is just Jesus, right?
Yes.
And it's
Yes.
Like before my justification and new birth, he's drawing me to himself preveniently.
Yep.
At the new birth justification, he unites me to himself, and subsequently he fills me with himself,
Yeah.
sanctifies me, right?
Yeah.
So there
Yep.
is no grace outside of the person of
Yeah.
Jesus Christ and the Spirit uniting him and applying his work to my life,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
And so if that's what grace is, it like great grace is life giving. Like I don't
Yeah.
think Methodists hold to a vision of grace. Like you might say prevenient, even prevenient grace almost isn't it somehow? I mean, that could be where the question is prevenient grace life giving or is it aimed at the giving of life?
Yeah.
Um, but we for us in Methodism because we don't have a common grace category like in the Reformed world where grace is like common grace for reform in the Reformed tradition is just the grace you need to not destroy everything.
Right. Yeah.
It's
Right.
not salvific though. It doesn't say it.
Yeah.
And that's why I think
Yeah.
it's a false category because
Yeah. I agree.
like
Yeah.
grace is salvific.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but if we want to like talk about the mean, and so I wonder if like framing it that way helps people like if you're okay with talk of means of grace
Mhm.
and means of grace means God is somehow communicating his life to me,
Yeah.
then well the word for communicating life in theology is regenerate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, going back to your very first question, why does it matter to get this right?
Yeah,
Because it makes claims on God and great, God's
right.
grace and the triune God, the whole triune God. And so, in this sense, is what do we mean by grace? Because if
Yeah,
grace is simply forgiveness or grace is simply, what is it like God's riches at Christ's expense, the acronym,
yeah,
or unmerited favor or things like that, then yeah, we treat it kind of like this thing, like it's a confusion of grace. What does it mean
that's
for a
right.
means of grace? And so, or at least grace in this way, like that's what grace means here. It might mean something else over here,
Right.
but this is how that works here.
Yeah,
And so it does just become I was a horrible person or I was away from God and now I'm not like I'm being forgiven. I'm
yeah,
being something shifting here for me, not that something isn't shifting, but just saying that's really all it is,
yeah,
rather than like, no, this is life,
yeah,
like being drawn to the very life of God,
yeah,
in Christ and through the Holy Spirit and beginning to partake in the abundant life that Christ has promised us,
hmm
and grace is always doing that, offering that, and
and doing it.
doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think,
yeah,
I think in the Wesleyan tradition, we would want to say this is one of the differences between the Reformed tradition and the Wesleyan tradition. Is for us, grace is not mere favor. It is that, but it's not
right,
just that.
right, exactly,
It's not just pardon.
right.
Um, it is power,
Yeah,
transforming power,
yeah,
and like we can talk about means of grace, transforming power all day long, but at the end of the day, those are all just sort of ways of getting at the power of grace to give new life in the risen Christ,
yeah,
right?
right, right. Yeah, yeah,
So I think that's really important. Here's an analogy. I can't remember if I've shared this with you before. I've thrown it out with a few. I've never said this publicly, so this is the first time here.
nice.
I've thought about it for years. We may have talked about it at camp meeting this summer. I've pitched it to a few theologian friends to be like, if this is a problem, tell me it's a problem.
Mm,
But I wonder if we're on solid ground. I think we're on solid ground because the New Testament gives us human, like physiological birth as
mm.
an analogy for regeneration,
Yeah,
spiritual
right, right.
regeneration.
Yeah, Yep.
And in the physical birth, like when a woman has a baby, right? 9 months before the child breathes on his or her own, the child is conceived.
Yeah. Right.
And science tells us that's a living human being,
Yeah. Right.
right?
Right.
That living human being cannot survive on his or her own,
Yeah.
cannot breathe, cannot, like, there's no ability to ingest or eat or like anything.
Right.
But you have a living human being that has been generated.
Yeah.
And now it's going through a process of growth and development until that child is able to breathe on his or
Hmm.
her own, eat, be fed, right?
Right.
Um, and so I wonder if we could say, again, you mentioned confirmation a moment
Yeah.
ago,
Yeah.
if baptism is analogous to it. Analogous means it's similar in some ways, but not every
Yeah.
way, right?
Right.
If baptism is analogous to conception,
Hmm.
and confirmation is analogous to like your birth, right?
Yeah.
And and in this sense, when a child is baptized, they have to be carried,
Right.
right? You have to carry them to the baptismal font,
Yeah. Right.
and
Right.
they have to
Yeah.
be carried by their
Yeah.
parents, and you
Yeah.
have to learn to pray and read the scriptures and follow Jesus. Like you become,
Yeah.
like, because the context, as you argue, for discipleship is baptism,
Yeah.
right? And so whatever life is given in baptism is perhaps analogous to the life that's given in the conception of a
Hmm.
human being, and
Yeah.
whatever. And then if we want to attach like confirmation, when a person stands before the church and makes a public profession of faith, now they're saying, I this person, not that they don't need the community, but they're
Yeah.
able to stand on their own and make a public
Yeah.
declaration. I
Yeah.
don't, is there anything about that worries you?
No, I mean, initially not.
Yeah.
I think
You can
there's a
change your
lot
mind
there.
later if you want to.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think there's a lot to that, and I like that to say that part of it because the image there, you know, of being carried in the womb, everything that that does require, you know, you can't do this on your own. And again, like you're saying, it's not that we become individuals, you know,
Yeah.
but there's a personal faith here in some
Yeah.
way,
And when
like
you're
it's
born,
different.
you still have a family,
Exactly.
and honestly, you still need somebody to feed you, right?
Exactly.
Even if you
Exactly.
can digest it on your own
Yeah.
now or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. And I just love that. I mean, in terms of I mean, for me, like you were saying, that image of actually carrying a baby to the font, like a baby itself cannot come, you know, in terms of baptism. We're thinking baptism, not in terms of the birth part of it now, but baptism, there has to be all this surrounding to help with that. Um, and one of the reasons that I value paedo baptism so much, so infant baptism so much, is because all of these claims it makes about God and the symbol it sets before us. Yeah, we have to be careful. I mean, and we can be careful with paedo baptisms that we just see it as some kind of magical act, like we're just doing the incantation that's going to
That's right.
now, you know. So, and I can see the complaints against it, the arguments against it, right? That, like I was saying, Wesley in his own day was like, nobody here is living as if they're baptized. Like
Right.
90 some percent of England is baptized and none of them are living like it, you know? So he wasn't like, so rebaptism or rebaptize them or change baptism. It's like, no, disciple them now into the baptism that they have,
That's
you
right.
know? But, uh, but the other side of it, so there's a danger there is that we can just do it and then just like, well, check that off. Let's go on, you know? I'm good to go. So we don't want to do that and just use it as a get out of jail free card. But the other side of it is with credo baptism, there's a danger of turning it into works-based righteousness,
Mm.
right? And not feel, and I mean, people that would very thoroughly say, no, we do not believe in works-based righteousness. But we can turn it into that in some ways if we're not careful, or the way to talk about it at least, or approach it. If I do this, then God does this, or because I've done this, God will do this, you know?
Or
Um,
even attaching like a theology litmus test to it.
oh,
Like
true.
if you
Yeah.
can't articulate the gospel in a certain way,
Yeah.
you can't be baptized. And then all of a
Exactly.
sudden, like my relationship with Jesus is all of a sudden attached to my cognitive capacity.
Yeah. 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 And so I get very concerned about all
That
of
worries
that.
me deeply. Yeah.
So, but I think of God, like if I start with God, like don't, let's not start with baptism and then figure out how is God involved in this? What does it mean of God? I say, let's start with God. And what does that say about baptism? Or how does that help me understand baptism? If I
Good.
start with God, I think of, like one of the things that the early church would emphasize over and over and over again. This is the glory of God that he came to us in our deepest need.
Yeah.
And that's how we see the glory of God, is that he is a God that comes to us and comes to our rescue and comes to us in our deepest need. When we are at our most helpless, when we are at our most lost, when we are, all these, God comes to us and God comes to rescue us. And we submit to his grace and to, to all this, but God comes to rescue those that need him. He comes to the help of those who need him, and comes to us in our most helpless. But that idea, God comes to the rescue of those who need him. And who needs him? Everybody, right? We all need rescue. And so if I think of God's character in Jesus Christ, just well, Jesus is going to come to us in this world because we've turned our eyes away from God. We need to fix our eyes on him again, because we have gone astray, because we are lost like sheep without a shepherd. All of these things. Jesus is going to come to us, right? And carry us. Then I think in baptism, what better image of that than an infant that is the most helpless
Yeah.
creature alive? you
Yeah.
know,
I agree
just
wholeheartedly on that. I
yeah,
think that's right.
like in that God is come and saying like, I want to come to you and do something for you. Like at your most helpless,
Mhm.
I am here to rescue you.
I
You
will
know,
frequently say in an infant baptism, like, this is an image of the priority of grace. Like,
yeah,
this child has done nothing,
yeah,
they haven't asked, they haven't, like, they're like, doesn't even like, is this baby even cognitively aware of what room they're in?
right, right,
And that is a way of reminding us and enacting that God goes first.
yeah,
He's not responding to me
right,
taking hold of me.
yeah,
So, and
yeah,
to your point about it not being like a magic kind of spell or talisman, like that, I think is a obviously disastrous. We treat it that way. Some, oh, like, let's do the baby or have them baptized, and it's kind of a formality.
yeah,
Pastors should shepherd away from that,
yes,
right? That this doesn't resolve, it doesn't sort of get you off the hook, right? It increases your responsibility,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Everything gets ratcheted up if you do this,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because now you have covenantal responsibilities
yeah,
and you're accountable for that as a parent and as the church in
yeah,
relation to this kid and this child. And so, and at the same time, like, I would want to in some ways say that a child who is baptized and then walks away from the faith, um, is held to a higher level of accountability precisely because they've been instructed,
yeah,
right? And in
yeah,
that way, you might say your baptism testifies against you,
yeah. So
because
yeah,
yeah,
sorry.
go ahead. No, go
I,
ahead.
I love Martin Luther and his kind of baptismal theology. I mean, he believed we're sealed. We're sealed with baptism. You cannot wash it away. You cannot take it away.
Yeah,
So even if you go into the depths of hell, you're going to have like a special glow about you that people are going to be like, well, that one was baptized.
yeah,
It's going to testify against you, right?
yeah,
You're in hell, but you were baptized. We can see it.
yeah.
I kind of love that. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's just the vindictive side of me that likes that, but there's something kind of neat, like you can't take it away, you
Mm.
know? But to your point, like there's a responsibility. Like this is one of the things I really try to emphasize with my students, is that you could walk out of here having the best baptismal theology ever, like great, you wrote an amazing paper for me. If it's not undergirded by a robust pastoral theology, then we could do more harm than good in the church, right? Because you have a greater responsibility now, like you said. So one of the things I think is that like the arguments against a paedo baptism is that well, you baptize them, but then they disappear or whatever. So like, that's a failure of the church. Like it's what
Yeah,
we were talking about. Like we're good testimonies to the church, but the church just said like, hey, we just made commitment. We made covenant here. They're part of us, and we're not going to let them disappear. Like because we've made this covenant, even if the parents weren't
mm,
serious about that, we are, you know, and we're going to follow up like and the pastor is a key part of that, but also the church just to say like, hey, That's why I love sponsors in baptism
Mhm.
to say somebody's here to stand as a representative of the church, like an individual or a family or a couple, whoever, but they stand there. The church is making these commitments too, but they stand there as the godparents or sponsors or whatever to say, but we're ones that are going to be that symbol of the church for you,
Mhm.
and to care for you and to follow up and to check on you and to say, hey, are you coming to Bible school? Are you coming to Sunday school? Are you coming to work? Whatever, Um, and to make sure that somebody's caring for that. So I love that aspect of kind of the historic approach to baptism, to have those sponsors as part of that. But say we're serious about this. We don't want you to disappear. We want to help you grow. And we want to follow up with you and say we take this commitment seriously. It's not, this baptism wasn't just for you.
Mhm.
Like, we're all part of it. In fact, to go back to what we were saying before, like, we're all baptized into Christ and baptized in his waters. Every time a baptism happens, it's a remembrance of baptism for us.
That's
We're
right.
remembering it was like that. I did that.
Yeah.
I'm there too. I'm baptized too. And those waters are the same waters I was baptized in, and them coming into this, like, they're part of us now, and we're going to take that seriously. So
Yeah.
I just think that's so key. And I can get the argument against infant baptism when it is seen as, we do this, God's done something, we're good.
Yeah.
It's
That's a
like, no, no,
straw
no.
man though for a
Yeah,
rigorous. Yeah. I mean, that's
yeah,
I don't think I don't know that many people who hold to infant baptism that think that.
yeah,
I don't, maybe you know a few. I don't know.
yeah,
Sorry, I
yeah,
think yeah. It just you hear that as a criticism, but I would say most clergy I know are want to, maybe they're not articulating everything Wesley articulates here,
true.
but there
Yeah,
is a deep desire that this initiates a life of discipleship that
yeah,
obligates the church to this person.
yeah, yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, another thing with the pastoral piece of this is, so let's go on the other side of it. Say you have a believer. So I know you and Ryan talked a little bit about just that sequence, like
Mm.
the table, who can come to the Eucharist and all
Yeah.
this. There's a
You called me a
pastoral.
liberal on that.
I know. I heard it. That's, yeah. Um, so there's a pastoral responsibility here, though, is to say, like, these things matter, right? And one of the arguments that I believe Matt makes, I'm trying to remember if this was a conversation or if it's in the chapter, but one of the things that he makes in his chapter in the book
Matt
is to
Sigler.
say, yeah, Matt Sigler,
Yeah.
sorry, yeah, on the sacramental sequence, is to say we can actually do a disservice to baptism by just opening up the table and saying, like, well, you can come here without that,
Mm.
right? To say, like, well, what does baptism mean then? Why
Yeah.
why is it important and necessary if you're just doing this and never do that? And so one of the things that I'll talk to my students about is say, if you find somebody, and sometimes it's hard to know, maybe we're in a larger church and it's like, I actually don't know, if
Yeah.
this person's baptized or
That's
not. It
right.
gets tough. So sometimes there are words of invitation we might make, for those that are baptized and wish to come. If not, we still have to play our blessing over you. So sometimes there's that, but sometimes we just don't know. Um, but there's that part of whether it's us or our staff or our people, however it might be, leaders within our church, laity, lay leaders, stuff within our church, get to know people as we find those things. It's to say, if someone feels drawn to the Eucharist and they're not baptized, they are being drawn to baptism too.
Mm.
And that's a great opportunity to sit and talk with them about this and to
Yeah.
say, you know, um, look, like these, like, we believe these are actually together. There's something happening here and something together. And we want to talk through this now. So a great opportunity, a great doorway opened up to begin meeting with them and talking with them about baptism and understanding baptism. And asking them to refrain from receiving for a time. Say, prepare yourself for this. Prepare yourself for baptism. Take this time and let it kind of stoke that desire and excitement, for this. Something like that could be good. But um, the bigger issue here, though, is to say what you were saying just a moment ago is that there is a pastoral responsibility here that we have to take seriously to say these things matter. And so whether it's an infant being baptized and we're meeting with the family, to say, look, this is what this signifies, what this means, and this is the expectation.
Yeah.
And we really do take that seriously.
Mhm.
or whether it's someone on the other side to say this is what baptism is, this is what you're being drawn into,
Mm.
and here's, or like I said, somebody that find out they've been coming to the table and they don't, you know,
Yeah.
they haven't been baptized. Say,
Well,
hey, that's a great opportunity.
let's
There's a
get that
pastoral
done,
responsibility.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's good.
yeah,
That's good.
yeah.
Denominationally, I mean, how much energy do denominations need to get into in terms of, because you may have, I mean, I don't think it's a secret that in the Global Methodist Church that, maybe there's some differing perspectives on how much the denomination should say we are a sacramentally, have a sacramental theology of baptism. Is there space in one denomination for multiple views on baptism? Do we need to really nail that down and offer the resources to shepherd? Like, help us with that a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, and this is where it gets hard, like the essentials need to be kept in place. And so I think, I mean, personally, I think it would be really hard, like because again, to go back again to your very first question, why does this matter to get this right? Because of what it says about God and the nature of grace and
Yeah.
Christ's work in our lives and all of that. Um, to say, well, we're going to be a denomination and we'll let, we'll say, well, if you want to just do believers baptism or if you just want to do, infant baptism, whatever, just kind of make it a free for all. I'm like, no, because we're saying different things now. Like
Yeah.
we're actually saying different things. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't like, sorry, you're older and you never had, we can accept both, but
Yeah.
to say like, but we have to say we have a firm stance
Yeah.
on
Just to
this.
to be super clear on that too, like for like a church like the GMC to say like our normal practice is the baptism of infants, it doesn't mean we deny baptism to adults who haven't been
Right.
baptized.
Exactly.
I've baptized plenty of adults, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so it just means the same thing, right? It's
Yeah.
it's not it's
Yeah.
not primarily a symbol of their profession of faith.
Yeah.
It's primarily a symbol of God's
Yeah.
sacramental love.
And to say we don't rebaptize,
Yep.
right? Because it's saying
Right.
something about the sacrament, but also about God and about these. So some of those things. Now there might be preferential differences to say, again, like we're not going to make a mode maybe sacrosanct to some degree, So like you have to immerse or it's not a valid baptism,
Right.
So like, oh no, we can accept these, but maybe this church really they have the ability, the capability, and they want to immerse, and they really feel like that helps us live into this symbol the best way we can. And you want to do that. I think something like that, but not to make it like, but if you're not, then you weren't really baptized. You weren't. So it could be places like that where there's nuance,
Yeah.
um, and things. But I think because of claims about God and the church and about grace, there have to be key things that really have to be together on. Um, and that's yeah, it's just hard for me.
Can I put it this way?
Yeah, yeah, please.
We need the church not to punt on this one,
Yeah,
right? The church
yeah,
exists as an authority for us
yeah,
to define doctrine, like faith and practice, and um, and we need, and I think for me, just coming out of, well, but those of us who came out of our predecessor denomination have come out feeling the challenge of not having kind of a theologically robust heritage over the last 50,
yeah,
60 years or so, right?
yeah,
I mean, the UMC specifically started out with like we're going to do theological pluralism and methodology,
right.
but we're not going to do doctrine,
Yeah,
right? And that impoverished us,
yeah,
like theologically.
yeah,
And I would hate to see the Global Methodist Church take something like the sacrament of
yeah,
initiation into the church
yeah,
and not um, offer us rigorous, thoughtful, scripturally grounded,
hmm,
and in a way that honors our Wesleyan heritage. It would I think it would sadden me deeply to see the church not offer us something really rich
yeah.
and helpful as a resource on that.
I agree,
Too
and
important.
yeah, I agree. It's too important. It's way too important, and um, talking with Jeff Greenway one time about some of this, just the sacramental. conversations and debates where he
Now,
said,
now a bishop in the Global Methodist
yeah,
Church.
now Bishop in Global Methodist Church. Jeff said, we cannot take a book of Judges approach to the sacraments where everybody does what's right in their own eyes.
Oh, wow.
That does not, that
That
will
is so helpful.
empower. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. I was like, that was a great way to put it.
Mm,
We cannot do that with the sacraments.
wow.
And and that's why conversation is good, why we need to think historically and theologically and biblically about these things. So
Yeah.
biblically, and we need to in our biblical work and exegesis, we have to be careful and not just look for the gotcha lines,
Right.
you know, conversation, like true conversation and patience
Yep.
to work through these things. So it can't be, well, Peter said, repent and be baptized. So that's how we do it. It's like, well, Jesus said, baptize then teach.
Yeah. He also said baptism for the regeneration. Right.
Yeah,
Same.
right.
Major
I mean,
Peter, right?
so
Help us out
it's,
here.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, so like, I
Proof
don't know what
text
this,
won't do the trick, right?
no, we
Yeah.
can't do that. We
And I
cannot treat it that way. We
and I
have to
think
have
that that's why
deeper conversation.
we need books, and
Yeah.
we need like this conversation is going to end up being probably close to an hour and a half, like kind of long for like let's just work through some of the issues. Let's
Yeah.
let's devote some time and some thought. And I want to say too, like I I think am willing and have taken kind of a pretty strong stance on that, but that I
Mhm.
don't want that to be interpreted as a lack of charity.
Yeah.
You
That's
know,
good.
like I'm happy. I have tons of friends who disagree with me on, I have
Yeah.
family members who disagree with me on what baptism's about.
Yeah.
And there's no lack of charity there. And I'd be
Right.
happy to sit down with folks in the Wesleyan traditions. All right, let's talk through and try to get to a place where we understand what this is about,
Yeah.
and how to honor our heritage as well, though.
Yeah.
I think that's a really crucial piece. So
And meeting those places, I've had, with students here, even had across the board. I taught a sacramental theology class one time that had Eastern Orthodox, Lutheran, Catholic, United Methodist, at the time, Methodist, Quaker, Salvation Army, Independent Baptist, and there's probably some other, but I know it was at least those eight all in one class. And it's like,
wow.
wow, we're going to talk about sacraments in this group, and it's going to be really interesting. But it was great. Like the
Yeah.
conversation was so good, and so like the students did a great job in that class of really working through things together. Um, but one of the things was to say, like, with some friends who come from more of a credobaptism viewpoint, to say, I appreciate that you actually are taking this seriously. It matters. Like, it is apparent this matters to you and you want to do it right. Like, I
Yeah.
appreciate that so much.
Absolutely.
Can we talk through, some of our differences and why there's some distinction here between us, some difference and distinction between us? And can we at least start on the ground of we both think that this matters and is very important, and we really want to make sure that we're faithful to do it right. And
Yeah.
if we can approach each other with that, then we can have some very good charitable conversation and not just, you're an idiot because you don't know good theology or history or whatever. It's like, no, like I don't, that's not going to be helpful at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's good. Jonathan, thanks so much for taking the time to have this
No,
conversation. It's
thank
been
you. Thank you.
illuminating for me, and I hope listeners will grab the book, New Life in the Risen Christ, A Wesleyan Theology of Baptism. That'll be linked in the description below. And again, thanks so much for coming on Theology Project.
Thank you.